Benjamin Quarles, I believe it is in a 1935 text, says that the Negro is the conscience of America.
We are here because of the great cloud of witnesses. And so let us think of our ancestors, our personal ones, our religious ones, our ones in the struggle.
Struggle is one that is long and deep, and that it requires of us to understand that we are part of a tradition of people who have always struggled before us.
And tonight is about naming the ancestors, burying the things that have brought us pain, whatever we've brought into this space. And at the same time, we're going to talk about hope and the hope that the ancestors give to us.
Our people have been having power since we came into this world. We were born with power, raised with power, live in power, birthed by power, stand in power. And we know that Frederick Douglass says this power concedes nothing without a demand. And so we know that there was a system that was created, an institution that was created to come and combat and dethrone and devalue the power of black people.
That New Orleans was a perfect space. The spirit, the ambiance, the aesthetics of it, just in the history and the rich culture that's here really, I think, gave people the permission to be black in this space and to try on what that looks like, even though it has this a spectrum or an array of how it shows up. But I think it was a space that created this kind of narrative where it could center around just who we were as black people in the Unitarian Universalist Association.
Visibilizing the structures of oppression that live within us and having a community of folks to work through that with, who will hold you and support you in moving through that, is part of the central thing that I think is coming out of this convening.
Mm-hmm. So the most powerful moments in this conference have been the worships for me. Hearing from black sources and black love in worship doesn't happen where I'm from, and all white congregations. I love it, I need it. As someone who's going into ministry, it's nice to see their sources and know that there's people out there doing the same work that still thrive on black love.
We call into the presence of all of those who came before us, knowing that we are the dreams of our ancestors.
We are grieved. We are sad. We may even be angry. But we also feel a glimmer of hope that we can overcome the burdens and obstacles that life places before us. We can find the strength and courage to go on.
I'm free, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free. Hallelujah.
Good evening. Hello to everyone out there in cyberspace. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Whose Faith Is It Anyway, a live stream event about Black UU Theology, hosted by Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. Thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Takiyah Amin, and I am Content Director for Blue, as well as a member of the Blue Organizing Collective Board. I'm turning it over to my co-moderator to introduce themselves.
Good evening and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reverend Mykal Slack. I am the Community Minister for Worship and Spiritual Care for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. I am also on the Organizing Collective Board, and I am so excited that we are here and in this moment tonight. Happy to have all you with us.
Very briefly, I just want to kind of mention a little bit about sort of our expressions of hope and aspiration for our time together. We certainly hope that the conversation tonight would be of interest to you, that it would edify and encourage you, and hopefully give you new ways of thinking about this faith, community, and expression that we understand as Unitarian Universalism. As a co-moderator, I want to say my hope is that we have some clear, bold, and prophetic conversation tonight about the future of our faith and the ways in which we choose to engage it as Black people, and that those of you watching will come with us on that journey, raise questions, and share authentically with us when we reach that time in the program. Mykal, how about you? What are your hopes for this evening?
Now, my hopes for this evening are that we have a good time, that we are able to engage Unitarian Universalism in a way that perhaps we've never engaged it before, or at least not out loud in these ways. My hope is that we understand that this is a beginning. This is a beginning of something really spectacular and beautiful and marvelous, and that we have some really incredible folks who are here tonight to share that with all of us, and that we're moving forward in some really amazing ways. And so I'm excited for the movement of this conversation. I'm really thrilled for the spirit of this conversation, and I'm excited that it will embolden my Unitarian Universalism, and I hope that it will do that for others as well.
We're going to stay with you, Reverend Mykal, and let you set us up a little bit. Talk to us about the logistics for today's program.
Yes, thank you, Takiyah. Just wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing in this online setting and how we're going to kind of manage our time. We are in what we call webinar format in Zoom, which is an online video and phone conferencing platform. So all of the folks who you see right now are all of the panelists and your two co-moderators. What we're going to do for the evening is spend some time, some extensive time with the panelists first, focusing in on three main areas, which you'll be really clear about as we move through the conversation. So make sure you have pen and paper ready. Make sure you have your thumbs at the ready if you're using an app on your phone to take notes, because we're going to have a question and answer portion of the conversation later. So feel free to jot down some questions as they come up for you while the panelists are sharing what they have to share with us tonight. When we move into that Q&A portion, obviously there are going to be folks who are watching us live from our website. That's great. If you do have specific questions, we're going to ask you to actually move to our public-facing Facebook page, where you will also find the live feed. And there you can ask questions in the comments section. We'll go over this again when we get to that portion of our time, but just wanted to let you know ahead of time how we're going to manage the Q&A. And one final thing, just I think it's important to note, if your questions don't get answered, because my hope and prayer is that folks have a lot of questions, we may not get to all of them tonight. We're here for a limited amount of time, but the hope is that we'll be able to weave some of those questions at least into the community conversations that are coming up in the upcoming months, which again, we'll talk about when we get to that point.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Reverend Mykal. Again, thank you if you're just now joining us. We're so glad that you took some time out of your evening or afternoon to be with us. We know some of you are in communities that are experiencing frigid temperatures, so we hope that you're doing your best to keep warm. We also know that there are several congregations across the country that are streaming the event tonight in their fellowship halls or in their sanctuaries. We thank you for that. Hello, everyone who may be watching from a local congregation. We appreciate you for coming together and spending this time with us. By way of introduction, I just wanted to very quickly introduce a few of our panelists, and then Reverend Mykal will introduce the last two. I'm very excited that we have Duro Farrar with us. Duro, will you unmute yourself and say hello to the people?
Hello, people.
Tell us where you're from and where you're representing right now, Duro.
Sure. I'm the director of music here at the First Unitarian Church in Portland, Oregon. I'm also the president-elect for the Association for Unitarian Universalist Music Ministries. And I'm glad to be here.
Shout out to the music ministers. Shout out. Thanks so much. Next, one of my favorite people in the world, Reverend Kim Han. Can you unmute yourself and say hello to the people?
Hello, everybody. I'm one of those people stuck in the near vortex. St. Louis is just a little far south enough that we didn't get the brunt of it, but it's a balmy 10 degrees here right now. So, which is better than minus 24, which is what it was for my cousins up in Chicago. So, life is good.
Thank you so much for being with us, Reverend Kim. We are glad that you made time to be here with us and that you're keeping warm with us today. Donte Ramon, one of my favorite folks. Unmute yourself and holler at the folks. Say hello.
Good evening, everyone. It's so good to be here with you. I'm joining you from the holy city of Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm so excited to be a part of this organization and a part of this amazing panel of people who I think are just absolutely amazing, and I'm just excited about all that will manifest and be revealed in this moment.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Donte, so much. And we're going to move over to our wonderful panelist, someone who was just so good and wonderful and showed up and offered reflection at the last Blue Worship, Ian Hill. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to unmute yourself and just let us know a little bit about where you're coming from and who you might be engaged with at this moment.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm at Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California. I'm so grateful that my school was willing to broadcast from here. Many thanks for that. I'm a third-year seminarian preparing to graduate soon and hopefully be more active in Blues community. So thank you for having me today.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Shout out to the seminarians.
Shout out to the seminarians. I know there are many of you on this discussion tonight, so thank you all for tuning in. We also have one other panelist who will be joining us hopefully shortly, Dr. Stephanie Mitchum. I'm going to go ahead and just say a little bit about Stephanie before she gets here. She's running a little bit late this evening. She is a professor at the University of South Carolina and has been since 2005 and holds a joint appointment with the Women's and Gender Studies program in the Department of Religious Studies and a longtime UU. So we're excited to have her with us once she arrives.
I also just want to pop in really quickly and say, shout out to everybody else on the Blue Organizing Collective Board. We know that you all are watching. Special shout out to our Executive Director, Lena K. Gardner, who is in Minnesota, where earlier today it was minus 48. So we are sending our love. Shout out to everybody in the Blue community who's been supportive of these events. And again, thank you so much for giving us your time. We're very grateful.
Thank you so much, Takiyah. That's absolutely right. This is, these moments don't happen on their own. And the spirit of them really begins with all the people who are engaged with and in our community. So thank you for that. Let's go ahead and get started. But as we do that, I really want to invite all of us to just take a deep breath or two, settle into our seats, hold on to your hats, as it were. We're going to have a good time. And so I'm going to go ahead and just get us started here and ask the panelists to speak about Unitarian Universalism in broad strokes, which is going to be the first sort of main area that we want to talk about. I know for myself, it took me a long time to discover Unitarian Universalism. And I'm really intrigued by and we are intrigued by what was being taught and understood in Unitarian Universalist spaces that you found yourselves in, or that you are currently in now, and how does that, what you've been taught and what you understood of Unitarian Universalism, how does that relate or not to what the rest of the world understands about Unitarian Universalism or witnesses from UUs? And don't hesitate to please weave. The hope is that you're going to weave some of your own story and your engagement with Unitarian Universalism into how you might respond to that.
Donte, it would actually be great to hear from you first.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. So I actually spent a great deal of time pondering this this afternoon as I say, a little Black boy from East St. Louis, Illinois, who was raised in a Midwestern and Southern Baptist tradition. When I became a seeker of different traditions outside of my own, I actually discovered Unitarian Universalism early on my journey in the early 2000s. But there are two things that struck me about what I observed. Well, three things. One was I was really excited about the plurality and the space for difference and multiplicity and otherness. And I thought, this is what feels right for me. And that was really exciting. But there were two things that concerned me. There seemed to be this assumption about reason and mind over body. And again, as a good Midwestern Black Baptist-costal, so much of our spiritual journey is also embodied. Our worship is embodied. The way in which we share in community is very bodily. And so a notion of a tradition that felt more concerned with cerebralness, and this coming from a nerd, over bodily expression seemed a bit standoffish and foreboding to me, and limiting. And then also, I didn't know any Black people who were Unitarian Universalists. And so all the representations were very, very white. And that also became a huge barrier for me. So although I discovered Unitarian Universalism and thought this should probably be where I should be, those two things told me to keep looking. So I ended up joining the United Church of Christ, mostly because of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, that it's extremely Black in its theology and its way in which it manifests and unapologetically as part of their motto. So that's where I enter in. And I think that as we think about whose faith is it, we really have to think about the legacy and traditions of European philosophy and the Enlightenment stuff, and really think about what part of this is deeply cultural and that has been deified. Because I think we find ourselves in a quagmire when we insist in reason and rationality over body and emotions, as if the body and our emotions do not have their own sets of reason and rationality. I'll stop there.
Thank you. A clear disconnect between those two. Thank you for articulating that. I would love to hear from you, Dero, as someone who is a music minister in my mind, and so much of what you do and how you engage congregations is really about how folks are able to take in that aspect of your ministry. And so I'd love to hear what you would have to say next.
Sure. I come to Unitarian Universalism by way of vocation. I first learned late in life about Unitarian Universalism when helping some friends with a wedding. And they had their wedding out at Camp de Beneville Pines, which is in Southern California. Mm-hmm. That was sort of my first entree to Unitarian Universalism. And I was working in a Methodist church at the time and did not like it. And so I was looking for a way out. And so that's sort of what my introduction to Unitarian Universalism was. And I've been here ever since. As you, Mykal, and Takiyah both know, I say it all the time, I am not a Unitarian Universalist. I believe in the potential for Unitarian Universalism. I believe in the hope for Unitarian Universalism. I do not believe Unitarian Universalism is yet ready for me and my expression of Blackness, my expression of faith, my expression of personhood in a lot of ways. And I'm patiently waiting for Unitarian Universalism to be ready. And when it is, then Unitarian Universalism and I can have a conversation about that. In the meantime, I sort of watch actively from the sidelines and am free to express what liberal religion or what liberal faith means to me without having to be bound by the confines of Unitarian Universalism and its history and its baggage, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That's real. That's real. Thank you, Dero. It seems to make good sense to move to you, Ian, based on some of the things that you have shared. I think it'd be great for you to follow up.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for the segue from Dero, because I am not patiently waiting on UU to get their stuff together. I am right now actively demanding that they be ready for me right now in my expressions of Blackness, queerness, multi-religiosity, subversive leadership, all the things. They have to be ready now. And one of the ways that I am calling the institution to be ready is by talking to the professors at this institution, by talking to the president, engaging with student body to have more Black UU theology here in person being taught, particularly just as of fall of 2018, I took a UU history course, and all of the required reading material for this graduate level UU course was all written or edited by white cisgender men. I find that deeply problematic to be at a radically progressive Unitarian Universalist identity school for all of the materials to be encased in this white shell. Because there were some authors of color, some Black people who had text and videos that were in this, but it wasn't good enough to me that it was encased in like other white books or films that were edited, directed primarily by white men. So by that, talking to my professor, talking to school leadership, trying to get things like that changed, because I think it doesn't make sense to be coming into institution in 2019, 2018 last year, and still learning so much about just white UU history when I know personally of Black UUs who have written books that tell their history. I want to see more of that, and I'm making it happen now. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Ian. This notion of Unitarian Universalism being encased in whiteness is a pretty powerful image and on point in a lot of ways. And so thank you for laying that, for offering it in that way. I would love, I feel like Kim Hampton can respond next to that. So I would love to hear from you, Kim.
Oh, there's so much to say, and I see that Dr. Mitchum is here, and so it's so great to have somebody else who does a lot of this on the academic side. But I'm like in the middle of all of this, because most of the time I say that most days I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and other days, oh no, y'all can go just straight to whatever expletive you want to put there. And because Donte and I grew up quite similarly in that I went to church on the East Side, went to church in Centerville, Illinois, which is literally right outside of East St. Louis. And I am a Jewangelical. I grew up in a half Black, half Jewish neighborhood. And so all of my friends were Jewish. And so for me, the idea of Unitarianism is something I didn't hear about till I was grown. But Universalism has been with me my entire life, partly because in rebellion to my evangelical upbringing, because I refused to believe that my Jewish friends were going to hell. That was just anathema to me. And so I came into Unitarian Universalism in college because I went to school in Texas, and the Methodist campus ministry was really big. And I told a friend that I was thinking about going to something that the Methodist campus ministry was going to do. And she looked at me and said, "You're not a Methodist. You're a Unitarian." you'll let me know. And that set me off on a journey, because I'd heard the word Unitarian exactly once before in an art history class. And when you talk about triptychs in art, triptychs are about the Trinity. And my teacher pointed out that there were people who believed the opposite, and that there were unitics, or whatever, I can't remember the exact technical phrase is, and that those were Unitarians. And I'd heard the word, but who cares about that? And most of the time, that's what I'm at. Oh, who cares about the Unitarian side? Because it is what it is. But I straddle a whole bunch of worlds. I am working on a book. I go to AAR, which is for UUs who are used to General Assembly. I call AAR GA on steroids. And it's people who actually think about religion and in all of its forms, in that multi-religious way that Ian was talking about, because you have to, and it's a great place to go. And so I'm there, and then I'm in UU spaces, and then I'm in Black church spaces, because I go back and forth, and I refuse to give up what my great-grandmother gave me, which is Black Christianity, which I think in many what Black Christianity and Black theology can save the world if only white people would listen.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Reverend. I am really grateful to have Stephanie Mitchum with us. We're glad to have you. We took some liberty and introduced you a little bit before you arrived, but I'm hoping that you're listened in enough that you kind of know where we are. We're talking about Unitarian Universalism in broad strokes, like what was taught and understood in the spaces that you found yourself in, and also how has that seemed different to you from what other folks are kind of witnessing and experiencing outside of the context of Unitarian Universalist spaces. So we're happy to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And feel free to respond to that question as best you can in this moment.
Big questions. I come from a background where I was raised in a Catholic household. The insistence on being in a Catholic household, no, I need to take that back. My mother put us in Catholic school. And so at the time, in order to be in a Catholic school, you had to be Catholic. And so therefore, we were Catholic. My father wasn't Catholic. My relatives weren't Catholic necessarily, but we were, because that meant that we could be in a school. Long and short of it is that I was also in a family where people explored their religiosity in all different kinds of ways. So by the time I left the Detroit area, we had people in Unity, we had people who were Muslim, we had people who were all shades of Christian, including, I think, Jehovah's Witness. No, maybe it was Seventh-day Adventist. It was one of those two. But it's just this idea that we are brought forward to explore this. But for me, getting in touch with the Unitarian Universalist side was through a couple of ways. One is through a doctoral course I had, where I was doing a paper on Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and inserted in there, her family was also specifically in the AME church, but she herself became Unitarian Universalist, Unitarian, right? They weren't together yet. So the question I had as I wrote the paper, it wasn't the question that came to me, but a question that the professor who graded the paper asked me. She said, why did she become Unitarian if all of her family was AME? It was like, I don't know. It was just a bell went off. The other one is that I became involved while working in the city of Detroit with First UU, which at that time was just called Cass Corridor UU. It has since gentrified. I don't even recognize it anymore. But I mean, they had the best Kwanzaa celebration in the city. We did Detroit Summer out of the church building and met there quite regularly, worked there with Grace Lee Boggs. It was a great experience. And so I was also at the time working at a Catholic university, so I couldn't quite come out as a UU, but I was able to after I left. But I just need to say this, the base of who I am, UU is part of me. That is a kind of a structure. And I'm like, you know, Kim, in saying, sometimes I don't even deal with those people. But the reality is the base of who I am is tied up with African traditional religions. So I've put together this idea of create your own theology. Okay, I've been doing that. And so here I am.
Yes. All of it together, right? Tied to what you said, Kim, because, I mean, you were saying because it was required, but the truth is all of it matters. If we are going to show up in the fullness of who we are as Black folks, all of it really matters. So thank you all so much for sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Takiyah, who is going to lead folks in the second main area of our discussion.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you so much for the richness that all of you have shared. I will say just very briefly for myself, folks who know me know that I come from a multi-religious family. You know, my grandparents were AMEZ and Baptist. My parents are Muslim. I grew up in a multi-religious family, which showed me very early that no single group of people had cornered the market on the divine, right? So as someone who didn't discover Unitarian Universalism until I was in high school, I had already had this idea that perhaps discrete religious identities were a little bit problematic in the way that they had been conceived. And so, you know, as someone who identifies as Unitarian Universalist and has been a member of 5 different congregations over the years, you know, I show up as my full self. When I walk in the door, you know, I don't bifurcate that way. I can't leave my Blackness outside and my womanhood in the parking lot and my working class self somewhere else, or my you know, all of that shows up at once. And one of the things that strikes me as we sort of talk about this notion of decentering whiteness in Unitarian Universalism is that if you go to any congregation sort of UU 101 or introduction to Unitarian Universalism, you get this sense that didn't nobody Black help shape what we understand to be Unitarian Universalism today. And I knew very early on that didn't make no sense, because just like any other kind of Western institution, Black and brown people have always been a part of the building and maintenance of whatever that. So I knew that didn't make any sense, right? At the same time, I want us to really drill down into this idea of what would it mean to live in Unitarian Universalism in a way that decenters whiteness. What would it mean, for example, to look for the theology of Black Unitarian Universalism in the lives of Black UUs, as opposed to kind of historic philosophical documents? So kind of laying that out for us, I want to come to you first, Kim, with this notion of decentering whiteness in Unitarian Universalism. And I'm wondering if you can speak to sort of the ways in which the institutional faith has kind of glommed onto certain historical personalities as the only authorities in our faith, and how we might change that?
Again, so much to say. But when Donte was talking earlier about the split between emotional and physicality of religion, which is something that indigenous peoples of whatever stripe do, and the rationality of white supremacist religion, I'll just put it that way. UUism, or Unitarianism specifically, and I do think we have to make that distinction, is the absolute, if we looked it up in some encyclopedia of religion and rationality, everybody in that book would be some white Unitarian, because that's what they did. Because I know a few weeks ago at Star King actually sponsored a symposium with Dr. Melanie Harris, and I got to ask her, because I get to say it out loud again. My goal is to give Emerson and Thoreau and all those wonderful oversoul people the right and proper burial they so properly deserve. It is not that I hate them, because, okay, on Thoreau I actually do hate him, but Emerson I do not hate, because once you go to seminary and you read the divinity school address, it actually makes sense. But the whole idea that you can have an oversoul, that you can separate your body from your religion, just makes no sense. And in that way, that there is a white supremacist way of how to do religion that takes away the wholeness of a person, in that all that matters is the head. Forget anything else. Forget the fact that we do, so many of us sing when we gather together. It's the brain. It's not even our vocal cords that matter. It's our brain that matters. And much less any other physicality that might present itself in the context of religion. And so my wish is that we see that our deifying people like Emerson and Thoreau and Emily Dickinson, and may she be resting in peace, Mary Oliver, who see things in a way that ignores 95% of how we live our lives. And it's not that they don't have a place in our worship. They do. You can give them Earth Day. Really, it would work for me if we just gave them Earth Day. Give them Earth Day. But the rest of the year, can we do something else?
You know, Rev Hampton, I have to chuckle here because, first of all, thank you for that. And, you know, as someone with a PhD in dance studies, my mind is reeling. This split, this Cartesian dualism between the mind and the body, as if the body is not a part of the mind. You know, that's already, you know, ringing my bell over here. And also this idea that embodiment is not intellectual, that when we think about Black intellectual history, we want to let that be about written legacies or textual legacies and not embodied choreographic or creative legacies. That's, you know, a real kind of challenge that I deal with in my scholarly life as well. So I thank you so much for lifting that up. Dero, I want to come to you still along these lines of decentering whiteness and really kind of deal with this notion of exclusion, right? Like, does decentering whiteness mean that we have to have spaces that perhaps white folks can't access? And maybe what are the implications of that, or what are your thoughts about that? Especially given that Blue has, at various points created explicitly Black spaces for worship or gathering or organizing. What do you think the implications of that are theologically?
Well, that's the question, right? The question, as I see it, is it necessary? Is it necessary in order to support and hold up well the health of Black people in Unitarian Universalism? Do we necessarily need to have some spaces that are exclusively Black in order for that to happen? Because here's the thing: I don't think white people quite understand the power of existence. I don't think white people quite understand the power of their own existence. So when one person shows up in a room full of 300, one white person shows up in a room full of 300 Black people, that room has now become white by nature of that one person's dominance. And I think it's that power that white people don't quite understand. So if we do have these spaces that are designed from the bottom up, as Black spaces that get to design Unitarian Universalism from that position, from the position of Blackness, instead of in response to whiteness, which is what I see us doing, through the UUA and through other avenues. We're trying to create a Blackness in response to the whiteness. So if we instead started from the bottom up, in creating a Unitarian Universalism that was designed around Blackness, what would that look like? The only true answer I can think of is that it would look like a lot of angry white people, but oh well.
I really appreciate your candor and your directness there, especially because, if we think about Unitarian Universalism as a faith that is about covenant, that is about relationship, that is about communities, or communitarian universalism, right? You cannot be in covenant if you believe in supremacy. That is to say, if you believe fundamentally that your humanity is better and above somebody else's humanity, particularly at the location of their identity, whether it's race, gender, sexuality, ability, neurotypical, what you cannot be in covenant, in right relationship and deep relationship if you believe yourself fundamentally to be better than other folk. So there's already a way in which that kind of framing that Ian gave us earlier about Unitarian Universalism being kind of locked in whiteness, sort of a white supremacist frame, already betrays itself when we begin to think about covenant and community and relationship. And yeah, it probably would look like a bunch of angry white folk, but it might also look like a bunch of free Black people. So the possibility of that, I think, is provocative and desirable. Ian, I want to come to you, particularly around still this theme of decentering whiteness in Unitarian Universalism. Anything you might want to share, given the conversation we've had so far? I know you were a part of a course recently around theoethics and the Black Lives Matter movement that you might want to lift up, or any other thoughts that you have along these lines.
Yes. All of this is just so connected. One comment that I want to say as it relates to the Black Lives Matter movement and some that Dero was just saying, and all the panelists just now on this topic, in decentering whiteness, there is one element that I can call our white allies to jump in on, and that is the 8th principle. I really just can't emphasize it enough. I've been running into people who aren't familiar with it, and I feel like that is a way that white allies can show up in voting for this when they come. Like, they could be angry that Black lives don't matter enough, that this principle needs, that's how they can be angry. They can be angry and show up in that way. But as it relates to the theoethics class that I wanted to mention, was that in this class, I learned that Black Lives Matter is a theological statement in itself, period. that was just like so amazing to really like come to and to have it taught to me and expressed in that way. And when I thought about it in that way, it really made the Black Lives of UU to me seem like its own spirituality, its own denomination, like all by itself, period. And when I think of it that way, it's really reminds me of how the AME tradition that's been talked about so much, like how that's its own thing, and how Blue can be its own thing in that way, and maybe eventually be the kind of tradition that is welcoming and inclusive of all bodies coming in and being a part of it from the foundation and the ground and the container that is Blackness. But I think it has to go there first, to me.
You all are some of my favorite people to dream with. Thank you so much for sharing and showing up authentically as yourselves. I am effervescing. I feel like a bottle of ginger ale. You all are making me so happy and excited. But what I really am feeling in this moment is you are lifting up something that those of us who've been working actively in Blue have been thinking about for a long time, which is that when we gather together in explicitly Black space and in explicitly Black worship, there's something happening that is different than what I've experienced in mainstream space. And, you know, when I first came to Unitarian Universalism, people made it seem like you couldn't have a worship that was both authentically Black and authentically Unitarian Universalist, that you couldn't somehow be both of those things at the same time or have an experience that was both. And we know now that that's really not true, because we have forebears in this tradition who show us that, and the work of Blue also demonstrates that. So this idea that, well, you can't have something that is both decidedly Black and decidedly Unitarian Universalist at the same time, like that's a foregone conclusion, at least for me at this point. And I think it points us to some really hopeful pathways. So turning it to you, Reverend Mykal. Thank you all so much.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for everything that you shared. I am really appreciating where folks' hearts and minds and spirits have been, are going, and hopefully are really offering something powerful to the folks who are tuned in tonight. I wanted to move us into thinking more about Unitarian Universalism grounded in our faith journeys as Black people. We've already started to go there, right? And so thank you for laying the groundwork for that, Takiyah. I am always reminded of that moment at Blues Revival back in April of 2018. And I know not all of us were able to be a part of that, but I'm reminded of this moment when we're all in a room and there is a water station and a station where folks are anointing one another with oil, and a station where folks are receiving the bread and the cup, and a station where folks are meditating and honoring and holding deep silence. This room felt like magic to me. I'd never experienced anything quite like it. And I know that was true of so many other folks. So many other folks came out of that and thought, what in the world just happened? And what I found myself saying was, Black folks got together. That's what happened. Black folks got together, and you know, Charlene Carruthers in her new book talks a lot about how so much of our imagination and possibility was stripped from us, and that it takes some relearning, right, about what is possible, and believe in the possibility of that which other folks say is absolutely impossible, is what makes our experience as Black folks unique when we are all together. And so I would love to hear from you, Stephanie, in this moment, thinking about what it means to mine all of us as a source. We talk about where this sort of began, but how are we beginning again? I feel like we're already doing it, right? But can you talk about how we are beginning again and mining our own selves as a source for Unitarian Universalism that doesn't look, act, smell, seem like any other Unitarian Universalism we might have experienced before?
I think one idea that came across very strongly to me, and I had thought about it before, but it's even clearer to me now. I don't even know where this is going, but how to capture all the narratives of people in blue. If there hasn't been a way to notate what's happening, if the books have not included us, the us's, then we need to write our own books. And I'm not saying everybody write their own story. I am saying that it needs to be orderly, because if we all write our own story, you know what's going to happen. But it needs to be orderly and to be a way where people just begin mining the stories. So oral histories, narratives. Is there a way to pull together poetry? Before I heard everything people were talking about tonight, I have been impressed. I don't often respond to the Facebook page because I'm usually just clicking, looking, running. But there's a wealth of information right there. There are stories, there are ideas, there are images of people who are doing things. You mentioned prayer, talking about prayer and ritual. All of those things become places where write it down, make a record for us where we can, wherever we are, put it all online. I don't know, but something.
Thank you so much for saying that out loud. You know, it's amazing how the universe and the spirit align and work. You know, you're talking about how can we bring those stories, our stories as Black UUs to life. And in fact, at this moment, part of the work of Blue Micro 30 and Team Sankofa, which is a group of incredible folks who have been doing, beginning to think about what organizing could look like among Black UUs in various ways, had put together a living history project where folks could literally speak to one another and record those conversations and house those conversations in a space where other Black UUs could have access to them, to understand more fully who we all are and what this Unitarian Universalism is when its foundation is Blackness. So thank you for being in such alignment without even really knowing necessarily that's where we are, but we are in that moment right now. I would love to also hear from you, Donte. We have spoken quite a bit, you and I, just about the ways in which we sort of hold space in spiritual practice and conversation. I think some of the things that you've shared in the past have some meaning as we're having this particular conversation.
So I'm a bit stuck right now in the previous conversation. I'm trying to weave them together around decentering. But I entered this conversation from a very peculiar place. I am a trained African-American studies scholar. So whiteness for me never needs to be decentered because my center is always Black. But I find myself interacting with other Black folks who struggle differently than I do because they're trying to decenter. And I'm saying I'm always at the center. And I insert myself in the center regardless. So even if you write me out, even if you don't include my story, my culture, the trappings of my history, I see it. And I can see it in Emerson and Thoreau and those dead white people too, because they didn't manifest that stuff by themselves. Everybody is borrowing from somebody. So one, I think we have to think about the difference between being centered and decentering. But I think it's important in an institutional context, you have to do some active work around what's called decentering, because that's an institutional work. But I also think we have to begin to live in a way that is centered in Blackness. And so what that conversation brought up for me was, again, seminary and thinking about two kinds of theology that if we're going to take seriously, because I can say I'm only a Unitarian because of Blue. I've known about Unitarian. I looked at it, I thought about it, and I decided it was too white. blue. I'm a bluitarian, actually. Like, I'm here because blue exists. And as I said to Mykal, I was playing on Facebook, came across something, and I ran across a blue page, and I'm reading. And again, I'm a deeply Pentecostal boy. I believe in the old ways. And there's a story in the Christian scriptures and the old Hebrew Testaments about following the pillar of smoke by day and fire by night. And I said, that's where the spirit is right now. Because I believe that social movement is a move of spirit. And blue, when I ran into blue, I was like, oh, there's the spirit. So let me go over there. So I think that then we have to think about maybe three types of theology and take them really seriously. One, we need to talk about the original sin of white supremacy. If we're going to talk about sin, if that's a frame, if that's a container we're going to use theologically, then we need to talk about, for me, from a Black spiritual space, white supremacy is the original sin. It is the space out of which racism and sexism and heterosexism and so many of these other social pathologies emerge and are grown and maintained. And so I think, one, we have to take seriously and theologically the concept of white supremacy as original sin. Two, I think we have to take seriously a theology of the body, because for people whose bodies have been denied them, we have to be centered in our bodies and our bodily experiences and what we know biologically. Our bodies are a microcosm of the universe in which we exist, so that knowing us is actually to know oneself is to know the divine, is to know the universe, because it is in us and we are in it simultaneously. And I think that then we also have to think about a theology of transformation, where justice is core, right? And where Black love is salvific. Where we love ourselves into wholeness, where we love ourselves through danger, seen and unseen. And then lastly, I think we have to take seriously a theological exploration of diaspora. Because as a Black American who came through slave ancestry, and what we see in the Christian Testament, the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament, what we see is for me, the most powerful things that happen in those testaments are in these diasporic experiences. And it is the diasporic experiences that get demonized by the purists when we were pure over here. Well, we're in captivity right now, but we ain't got time to be pure. We need to understand our reality as it exists in this moment. And so what you talked about, that moment of worship, that was a religious, ethnic, and we manifest all of that together. And it is when we understand the divinity of diaspora, rather than thinking of diaspora as a watering down, as a destruction of, as if we were once pure, I think it transforms our ability to love ourselves, love each other, and be able to stand in our wholeness without, because I don't need to be angry about white supremacy and whiteness, because I know what it is. I'm not surprised. It is what it is. It's sin. It's this construct. I am in community with, I am less weary about that. Because that's going to be there. You know, it was here before I got here. It might be here when I'm gone. So that the salvation and the transformation that we need is all about how we will love ourselves in this moment that we have together. Because that's all, for all we know, that's all we got. We may come back as other humans, as ants, as trees. I don't know, because I haven't been there and come back. But while we are here, I believe that the only measure is how we will be with one another. And so I think that we have to begin to take some new theological ground that is rooted in who we are and where we come from, and be unapologetic about it. And unapologetic doesn't mean just like flagrant. It also means I don't have to explain it to you. If I decide to explain it to you, I'm being gracious. But I don't have to. And if you don't get it and you don't understand it, that's really not of my concern, because you too can pick up a book. You too can hit the Google machine. You too can be in relationship with other people. But I don't owe you an education out of your mess. I owe something to myself and to the communities of my accountability. And that is a different position. I'll stop. I'm going on and on.
You know, I just want to jump in here very quickly and say thank you for all of that. One of the critiques that Blue has gotten over the years is, you know, people will come up to us and say, you know, who gave you permission? And it's like, to what? To be? Like, Blue didn't ask anybody for permission to manifest and do his work on behalf of Black people. Like, that's already the wrong question, right? And also, it pushes back on this narrative that, you know, we've had people say, well, when you all are together in explicitly Black space, you know, what is that like? Because it's not diverse. And I'm always struck at this idea that we need white people or non-Black people of color in the space in order for it to be diverse. Blackness is always already diverse, always already hybrid, always already nuanced and complex and rigorous, and doesn't need the presence of whiteness or non-Black people of color in order to sort of make itself fit. So pushing back on those questions as the wrong one, or people who will say, you know, well, who's the Black Emerson? You know, who's the Black Thoreau? They're looking for kind of Black thinkers who are analogous to these white thinkers. Again, it's the wrong framing. It's the wrong set of questions to ask, because one thing that's becoming clear in our discussion tonight is that the source, or one of the most potent and divine sources for Black theology, period, and Black Unitarian Universalism, as we're pointing towards it, is in the lives of our people. You have to read the text of our lives and be in community and relationship with us in order to understand this emerging and ever-present theology, right? So I'm being quiet now.
Can I jump in really, really quick? Because Donte bringing up Diaspora also brings up, if you know anything about the Hebrew scriptures, I mean, it is all about communities that are in exile for the most part. For the vast majority of the Hebrew scripture, the Hebrews or Israelites, depending on which part of the scripture you're in, they're in exile. They're away from their home, or what they thought was their home. And so the whole idea of a theology of exile is completely, so that idea of purity, you can be pure when you don't have to worry about anything else, but exile means a particular thing. And how do you survive in exile? Because you might not know when you get to go back to the homeland and be pure again, if you could ever be pure once you get back to the homeland, which is a different question. But there's a whole idea in both diaspora and exile, and, you know, if we bring it up forward to Christian scripture, the whole idea of people under surveillance, under somebody else's rule, the whole idea of how do you deal with oppression and not make oppression king?
Right.
And that whole thing. So I just wanted to jump in there because, Donte, we should talk.
Yes, which is a conversation that happens often in predominantly Black Christian spaces, right? Which is, how can we claim this thing that was ultimately force-fed to us, right? Like you're right. It's a different kind of framing, and that's a real question, and I think a question that we're in the heart of here in the context of Unitarian Universalism. It looked like I know we want to move into some question and answers really soon, but it looked like, Ian, you had a couple of things on your heart. Wanted to give you a chance to weigh in here if you'd like, and certainly anyone else beyond that.
I have so many thoughts, but I won't backtrack to the moment when I first wanted to speak. What I will say that is relevant and present right now is in asking the question of, well, rather with Kim bringing up, I'm thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and in the Christian scriptures, as you were referencing, and it made me think of what would it look like for folks to honor the body of Trayvon Martin as the body of Christ? What would it look like for us to honor Nia Wilson as the body of Christ? Eric Garner, like all of these people who are being killed by an oppressive system in the same way that they killed Jesus, who was not white, who was a Jew, who was being persecuted and all of that. And the same way that that system killed Jesus is the same way that I feel that Black bodies are being killed now. And what would it look like if we were to honor these bodies in the way that some honor the body of Christ? Like that is just really, really present when I'm thinking about what Donte and what Kim was just lifting up, and it just felt like I needed to say that now. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What do you think, Takiyah? We want to take one more comment from folks related to all of this before we move into.
Sure. I think it would be great if we could, Darrell, I think you had a thought earlier that you wanted to share.
No? No, I was just telling Donte to preach. That's all.
Okay. Wonderful. Stephanie, Dr. Stephanie, did you have something you wanted to share with us?
Ashe. That's it.
And I just want to, I'm going to take the 10-second liberty here. I know that my family in Buffalo, New York, where it is blizzard and cold, is watching right now. So shout out to my multi-religious family who, let me explore Unitarian Universalism when maybe they weren't even quite sure what it was. But thank you for that. We've had a really rich conversation so far. And so I do think we can go into Q&A here. And we are blessed. You all can't see her, but the amazing and intrepid Paige Ingram is helping us tonight to field the Q&A. So if you want to ask questions of the folks who are assembled here, you can do so by putting your questions in the comment section under the live feed of the video playing right now on Blue's front-facing Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook and you have questions, go ahead and type those into the comments. Paige will get them to us, and we'll throw them out to the panel as they come. As we're waiting for that, I just wanted to say there's some thoughts, pieces of thoughts that have come up. This idea of Black love as salvation is a thread that came out tonight, right? This idea that oppression is not sovereign, right? This idea that what does it mean to build something out of Blackness as opposed to seeing Blackness as a reaction to something else, right? This idea of embracing sort of a creolization or hybridity as divine and as a kind of strength, as opposed to seeing it as indicative of a cultural loss or disruption, and the theological implications of that. Mykal and I are going to have an announcement right at the end of the program this evening about how we'll be continuing these discussions and weaving these threads over the rest of this year. So we are hoping that you'll stay that long to join us and hear those conversations, because we do have a fancy announcement that we're going to share. But these are threads that many of us have obviously been thinking about separately, right? In our own spaces, in small groups, in Facebook conversations here and there. And I think that the time is right and ripe to acknowledge that, you know, one of the things I'll say it this way. Institutional Unitarian Universalism, or the way that it's been represented, clearly is not reflective of the way many of us have come to know it or dream about its potential. Right? A lot of times I'll ask white UUs, you know, what is it that makes you Unitarian Universalist? And they will lift up the principles. And I often remind them that those principles are wonderful, but they're also the principles of the UUA. They're the principles of the UUA, the Association of Congregations. So if there was no UUA and there were no UUA principles, how do you articulate your faith? Right? I get concerned when people tell me, you know, I'm a UU because it lets me do whatever I want, because I don't think that's actually true. So how do
that's the sin of individualism, which
right now
one of UUism's biggest blind spots, that they do not understand the difference between individuality and individualism.
Break that down for us, Reverend Hampton.
Yes.
And part of that's part of the reason I talk about decentering Emerson and Thoreau, because our pale UU friends see Emerson especially talking about an individual life in a way that is completely white supremacist. It is all about oneself. It is all about the oversoul. It is all about this. And, you know, if I get on a Thoreau rant, we will never leave. Yeah, so it's just the whole idea that you can be an island unto yourself, and UUism has a love-hate relationship with it, but most of the time it's love. Mm-hmm. That they love that whole idea that you could be an island unto yourself and do it all on your own, mm-hmm. and which is different than individuality.
Which also doesn't make sense for a faith that positions itself as non-creedal but covenantal, right?
Right.
That part of the living out of the faith is in relationship to each other and the world around us. So, yeah.
Well, it's partly because in a lot of ways, UUism has thrown out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, we use the word covenant, and as somebody who grew up deeply Christian, and with Jewish friends, covenant means something. Especially in Judaism, covenant means something. And what you use or throw that word around as if we talking about throwing around a baseball. And, that word means something. To be in covenant with something means something. It actually means that that there's a third party in that.
Right.
I want us to just put a pin right there, because we do have a question that's coming in, but I also see 2 hands raised. So, Duro, if I can I give you 30 seconds to give me your thought? And then Donte, give us your thought, and then we'll go to our question.
Yeah, so the 2 things. One, I want to say that my experience of Unitarian Universalism is that people do actually believe that they can do whatever they want, and then they enact on that. And so that's problem number 1. The other thing I wanted to say, as Kim was talking, is that this is what I see as the problem with a democratic process in a system that only has one type of person. So when you've got all of the same type of people voting, essentially, making decisions through a lack of diversity, then there can be no liberation for anybody else.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Donte, you had a quick thought? Donte, you're muted.
Oh, no, that was from earlier. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, we do have a question here. Someone is asking about attendance at UU congregations. The question is, most UU congregations claim to be inclusive of Black community. However, that does not represent in their membership or attendance. There may be one or two token people, often by interracial marriage. What are we not doing, or what would make Black communities come to our congregations? I know we all have thoughts about this. I'd especially like to hear from those of you who are working in congregational context, but I really want to throw it first to Ian, our budding seminarian, this question about, what do congregations do to make themselves more welcoming to Black people? And I will just say, first of all, whenever I talk to somebody who says, what can we do to get more Black folks in here? I'm always like, well, what do you want us for? Like, the presence of Black people in UU congregation. Black people do not exist to prove that predominantly white congregations are liberal or welcoming. We're not evidence of your progressivism. And if you don't have any authentic relationships with Black community, what makes you think we would come to your congregations to begin with? So that's my thought. But my budding seminarian, Ian, what you got for us?
I feel like I want to co-sign what you just said, like very, very heavily, and say that I feel like it's all about hospitality. Granted, I'm, a child of the South, so like that is something that feels like really, really embedded in me. And I feel like that is the thing that invites Black folks, people of color, honestly, all people into a space. And if a community, fellowship, church, whatever it's called, doesn't have strong hospitality, you won't see my Black body there. That's like a requirement. Like, I have to feel welcomed. I have to feel like held in the space. I have to feel invited to move as I move, and not that I need to necessarily align with the way that you do things, because that's not real hospitality. That's like basically trying to make me assimilate or something like that, and I'm not about that. So I can only speak from my Black context and the way that I move, but I require hospitality at any door that I'm trying to go through. So I would so strongly recommend that as the foundation for any organization if they want to see more people of color.
It also just makes me, thank you for that, Ian. It also just makes me think of, as someone, again, who comes from a multi-religious background where hospitality was elevated to the level of ministry, right? Whether I'm in an Islamic context or a Christian context, welcoming is not something you do. It's something you are. So when I talk to congregations who say, well, how can we be more welcoming? Are you welcoming in your own life? Like, if you're not welcoming to people who are different from you in your daily walk, you can't walk into a congregation and put on the welcome coat and think it's going to happen, right? It's a way of being. It's a state of mind. It's a commitment. It's not like, all right, 2:00, time to be welcoming. You can't.
Right. And
I might not know everything that works, but I know for sure that doesn't. Go ahead, Mykal.
Right. It gets back to, I believe it was you, Takiyah, who said this earlier, about this inherent notion that somebody is better than somebody else. Like, if you show up with that, even if you have no real awareness of the reality of that, if that's what you show up with, it's going to manifest itself in how you're able to sit next to somebody who isn't like you. It's just the way that works. This question comes up quite a bit in a number of different contexts, right? Like, why aren't there more Black folks here? Why aren't there more queer folks here? Why aren't there more trans folks here? Well, folks haven't figured out. Folks haven't figured out what relationship building looks like and means, and aren't invested in it. Because if folks were invested in it, if covenant is something, as Kim says, that folks throw out all the time, but we're not also coupled with that, invested in deep relationship building, then you're not going to know the people who you're sitting next to, and you're not going to be invested in whatever it is that those folks sitting next to you might need. And if you're not invested in my need as a Black person, if you're not invested in my needs as a queer person, if you're not invested in my needs as a trans person, then I need to be someplace else.
Mm-hmm. Dero, did you have a thought, something you wanted to share?
Oh, Jesus. There's so much to say. I think I'll start by saying that Unitarian Universalist congregations, I'm now serving my third, they have this problem where they want to welcome people, They want to feel as though they're welcoming people, such that those people can come into the space that they have created and not change anything about it by nature of who they are. So essentially, you want Black skin's decoration for your pews to make you feel more liberated in your liberal religion, and that is just not how it works. That's not, if I can't come in and bring my Blackness and have that influence the space, have it shine through the space, then it's not a space for me. I work at a church where the senior minister is Black, the director of music is Black, and both of us are on that chancel every Sunday morning, and there's not a Black thing about that service. There's not a Black thing about that congregation. And because that's the way that people want it, right? It's nice to have the Black faces up there to say the Black things and to smile the Black smiles. And then ultimately they want their Unitarian church the way they want their Unitarian church. White.
Yeah. I appreciate that honesty and directness, Dero. Reverend Hampton, I want to come to you to say whatever thoughts you have about that, but also to segue into this next question of how do we practice Sankofa in going back to our Universalist roots and welcoming new Christians coming into the belief of universal salvation, recognizing that these are spaces in which Christianity may cause pain, particularly if we're thinking about Black queer Christians. And I know that you're active or have been with the UU Christian Fellowship. Yep. So thinking about how we get people back into dealing with the historical roots of Unitarianism and Universalism especially.
I'm going to try to put both of those together because I think about welcome a lot. It's, again, this is who I am. Whenever I hear that question, I turn it around on them and go, well, hell, why don't your kids stay? I mean, if we're not going to, I need them to be honest. Most UU churches aren't even welcoming to the people who grew up in them. So if you're worried about whether you can get me and, my cousin and my auntie and this person and that person, you ain't gonna get them because you can't keep your kids. So you should be worried about keeping your kids first and then wonder why your kids' friends don't come. Which is a completely different way of looking at how you do evangelism. Because, again, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, UU's decided that evangelism and proselytizing were the same thing. And they never were, and they never will be. And since they aren't the same thing, we should actually treat them as if they are two separate things. But, that's asking UUs to do a lot of thinking. And for some reason, a whole bunch of them don't want to do that when they come to church on Sunday morning. But the idea of bringing our ancestors with us, because whenever I step in the church, Hattie Mae is coming with me. She is, because, Hattie Mae was Hattie Mae. And you did what Hattie Mae told you to do. You just did. And eventually you would catch on to why she was telling you to do it. So I caught on to why she told us to do it. I go to church. I don't go to church as much as I should because my my UU options are limited. Unless I'm in Boston. And in Boston, I can do a whole bunch of things. And so I have other options. I can go Christian. I have no problem going Christian because I grew up in it. I still have my foot in it. If I decide to chuck it all, I'll become a Reformed Jew in AME. So it's not that big a thing to me. But we have people in our own history that we don't talk about nearly enough. I mean, Dr. Mitchum talked about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Guess what? Why don't more UU, especially UU ministers, know about her and the work that she was doing between the suffragette movement, the movement in post-Reconstruction America, and all of that, her relationships with people who were in all the major social justice issues of the late 19th century. That is just beyond comprehension to me. But of course, it is beyond comprehension to me that most UUs have not read Du Bois. So, and how is it that I have to have 3 or 4 different canons and be able to speak 3 or 4 different languages, and they don't? They could go their entire lives and not read Du Bois, who, if you actually read him, you would see he wasn't just talking about 1903 America, he's talking about 2019 America. He saw stuff that nobody else was seeing, or at least asking the question. And I think the best way to bring our ancestors in is to just ask the question. Come on, what do you have to tell us?
Thank you for that, Reverend Hampton. We have a question that I think dovetails with this nicely. Anybody who wants to can jump in. The question is, have any of the panelists or moderators had positive experiences in UU worship spaces beyond Blue? And if so, where? And what about the worship experience appealed to you theologically or spiritually? I will say, yeah, sure. I've had positive experiences. I mean, my favorite, anybody who knows me knows I lived in Philadelphia for a while. I was a member at Unitarian Society at Germantown. Shout out to Philly, shout out to Germantown. At the same time, part of what made those experiences transformative, I know, is that it was also the Blackest congregation I was ever a member of. So there is no kind of getting away from the presence of Black people as being fundamental to what made it positive. I'm also thinking about times when I got to hear Rosemary Bray McNatt preach, or Bill Sinkford preach, or Sophia Betancourt preach. Hearing Black UU ministers preach has always been a positive experience. And I will just say in a single sentence, what appeals to me theologically about Unitarian Universalism is the theology, is the possibility of plurality and beloved community. I think that's what brings most Black folk to Unitarian Universalism. It's not our diverse musical culture that's bringing Black folks in. It's the promise of beloved community and living lives in alignment with your values. This idea that I could be sitting in between 2 people who maybe don't call God by the name I call God, or don't call God at all. But how do we choose to live together in community in a way that is about love and family and covenant? The possibility of that is certainly what's brought me in. But what about other folks? Positive experiences you've had in UU worship spaces beyond Blue? Or what it is that about the worship experience that appealed to you theologically or spiritually?
I'm going to say that it had been my experiences in Detroit, that idea of a community church. It was exactly as you said, the Blackest UU space I've been in since then. Since I've been in Columbia, South Carolina, I don't know what they're doing there, but I was going, and I just reached that point where I stopped. But exactly what you said, the promise of the possibility, that holds me in. I participate in other places and in other times and in other ways. I might not go to that nearby congregation because they've lost their minds, but I do know that there is so much more than what is happening in that one little congregation. When will it happen? And in a way, everything we've been saying here, it's not going to happen until, not that they find some Black bodies, but that they have some understanding of who Black people are. Don't hang a sign outside the church that says Black Lives Matter if you don't know what it means.
Can I jump in there?
Sure.
The nerd in me, I'm a huge fan of a religious studies scholar by the name of Anthony Penn, who is a self-identified humanist, who gave up his clergy of his ministerial titles. I read one of his books in my last year in seminary. I was actually working on my constructive theology, and Anthony Penn ruined it, and I couldn't finish it. The book is called Terror and Triumph, The Nature of Black Religion. And I'm trying to write this constructive theology. What do I believe about creation? What do I believe about Christ? And what do I believe about people? And I'm reading this Anthony Penn book talking about none of that crap, not us Black people. What Black people care about is spaces where we're free. He says the nature of Black religion is where Black people believe they're the most free. So if being at that Methodist church, if I'm more free there, then that's how you got your Black Methodist. If being at that Quaker meeting house, if that was a space that was more free for me and my family, then that's how you got your Black Quakers. If going to nobody's meeting house was was where you was most free, that's how you got Black non-believers. Like that the nature of Black religion is Black full humanity. And wherever we perceive a space to allow us to be more free, that's where we'll be. So if we're not there, it's because we don't think we're free in that space. I'm stop because I feel like I'm preaching now.
It's so welcome. Thank you. Go ahead, Jerome. I see you.
I'm trying not to hear in this question the implication that the only time I can enjoy a UU context is if it is Black. And so I'm struggling with that because I don't need it to be Black in order to enjoy it. But I'll also say that I design worship for a living. And so I frequently get to experience worship scenarios that are enjoyable for me because I get to say what it is. And so that's important to me. What do I find in the theology of Unitarian Universalism that is appealing? Well, the theology itself is appealing for all the reasons that have already been stated and for all the reasons that are documented in all the places. It's the practice of the theology that I struggle with. It's just like how Christians often have a hard time being a Christian. And Buddhists have a hard time being Buddhists. Unitarian Universalists have a hard time being Unitarian Universalists. I sometimes wish that they would more consistently live up to the principles that are documented. I will say, just to point one scenario out, that the last Musicians Network conference, I got to be in charge of the opening worship of that conference. And I just, as an experiment, I asked the question, what would it be like if for all these dear white folks, these dear white musicians who are coming in, what if this worship service were totally infused with Blackness? What if it was all Black people on stage? What if it was all from a position of Blackness, and not only Blackness, but sort of Christian derivative Blackness? And I just did it, and it was one of the most meaningful experiences that I've ever had in a Unitarian Universalist space because of what Donte was saying. Because there was freedom. There was freedom there.
Thank you. Ian, did you have a thought you wanted to share?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to go back to the question of, have I had any good experiences? And I wanted to name my, what I call my home UU congregation, the church in Oakland, which I think by the name might have some expectation that it would be like primarily or mostly Black space, but it is not. And also my school, both being very different UU contexts and primarily white. And what was pleasant about this was that they actually have been committed to trying to work on their principles. They haven't been getting it necessarily right, but what was what has been just really, really amazing and transformative for me in my UU experience is their willingness to keep coming back to try again, even after something might have happened that might have caused me or just harm to Black community, Blackness in general, that I've been fortunate enough to be around people who keep coming back to try to look at how can we do this differently. And I personally had the experience of people contacting me directly and saying, when actually not even contacting me, I've witnessed when someone else is being approached, when some element of harm has happened to me that I didn't speak up at the time, just because I didn't need to, someone else spoke up. And that was, it gave me a sense of free, because I was already feeling free being myself, but the thing was of being free and not having harm come at me. So then being there, feeling free, and then experiencing like, oh, harm is coming towards me, and actually seeing a white ally like jump in front of that and be like, you know what? This just happened. I'm gonna name this. I don't think that this was okay. And I've had that start to happen both in my church community and at my school. And I feel like that that was really, really positive. And that's what led me to finally settle into this tradition and to say, yes, I can be a minister here because I have experienced that people are really, really committed to changing. Because if that wasn't the case, then I couldn't be here. So that was my good experiences.
As the song says, come yet again, come. Anyone else want to share their positive experience?
Yes, I wanted to share a little bit, but begin from the place of theology. For me, Unitarian Universalism is an orientation. It's an orientation toward love. It's an orientation toward liberation, right? And you can be oriented toward love and liberation coming from any number of doors. You can come through any number of doors and be oriented toward love and liberation. And it's that about Unitarian Universalism that made me feel really at home. In Unitarian Universalism, right? Not in Unitarian Universalist congregations. Some folks have this understanding that the congregation is the faith, right? And for me, they are very separate. I am very clear. I feel very clear about my Unitarian Universalism, most often not very clear about what it means to exist in Unitarian Universalist spaces. And so the only space really that I felt completely and totally at home in was Sanctuary Boston. Sanctuary Boston is an emerging spiritual community that was, I believe, started in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. And so it was starting at around the time that I was in Boston. And the thing that drew me into it was this orientation toward liberating the body in the space of worship, toward liberating the mind in the space of liberating the spirit in the space of worship. That I sat in that space for the first time and just cried. I just cried. That I had never seen it done that way before. And some of it was about the ways in which music was held in that space. Some of it was about the freedom that folks had to be expressive in that space, in body and otherwise. Some of it was about the fact that I knew that there were Jews in that space, and that there were lifelong UUs in that space, and that there were Christians in that space, that there were pagans in that space, agnostics in that space. And we were all in, it felt like we were all in community together. Like we could all be next to each other and be oriented toward love and liberation, and felt held in it. And I've never experienced it in any other UU space ever. I've experienced that in other kinds of spiritual spaces, but that's the only UU space where I've really felt that on a regular and consistent basis. And so was enriched by it. The only thing that I struggled with respect to that community was that it was predominantly white. And, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, we ended up, leaving Boston. And so I left that community and have missed it for all that it offered. But I know that I am very rarely going to get that in predominantly white space. I get it routinely every single time we gather as Black UUs. I feel that all over again. And it doesn't just happen in person, right? The fact that we can manage to manifest that in an online worship setting is pretty powerful. So it's like, I don't understand how that works. Like, well, we're all in here together, holding this space in a particular kind of way. And it's not something that everyone. I don't think it's something everyone can do. I'm just gonna say that because I think it's true.
Thank you for that, Rev. We have about 20 minutes left and a couple other things we need to attend to before we end tonight's live stream. Just to kind of recap for folks where we've been after we kind of introduced today's event and went through logistics and details, we talked about Unitarian Universalism in sort of broad strokes and how our experience of how the faith has been presented to us connected with and perhaps differed from our experience of it. We began to really dream together out loud and talk about a Unitarian Universalism grounded in Blackness. There were some great new words that came out tonight. I mean, somebody talked about being a Unitarian Universalist. That made me very happy. You know, I was talking about my own kind of communitarian orientation. So, and I will just say, you know, as someone with a PhD, we make up language all the time. So we can do that in this space as well. We also talked about Unitarian Universalism really grounded in and informed by our shared, complicated, nuanced, rich, and ever unfolding journey or odyssey as Black people. That there's something about sort of a Black Unitarian Universalist orientation or theology that has to be found or mined in the lives of Black people historically, Black Unitarians, Black Universalists, Black Unitarian Universalists, as well as those of us who are living now, and that the work needs to happen to capture and amplify those histories and narratives. So along those lines, I want to come to each one of our panelists and ask you for sort of a closing remark. And in that, we have our last question from the chat, which was, who are some of the Black theology scholars that one could be reading or studying? And I'm going to expand that just a little bit to say we can think broadly about what a scholar is. That doesn't necessarily have to mean someone whose work is only in the written word or someone who is academic. And I'm going to start with Donte. So give us some closing remarks, Donte, briefly, and let us know if you made us read one person, give us some homework. Who should we be reading or looking at?
Well, this is a perfect question for me because I wrote my master's thesis in seminary about this person. I am a Hooksophile. Bell Hooks is my premier theologian as a person who describes myself as a humanist. And I actually wrote my whole master's thesis about what if we approach the work of Bell Hooks as if she were a theologian. I assume she's a theologian. And then I began to mine her work through theological categories. It kind of upset some people in my seminary, I think, a bit. But I think because we have to expand who constitutes theologians and religious people and scholars. And it was something that some people really had a hard time wrapping their mind around. I thought, if I'm a humanist and this person writes the core of their work is about human liberation and freedom, wouldn't this person be a humanist theologian? Let's see. So I would encourage you, if you've not read Bell Hooks, you need to read Bell Hooks because, well, she is my divine teacher. I act as if I know her. So I always tell people, read Bell Hooks and Anthony Penn. Anything by Anthony Penn is amazing. And then my closing remark is just where I end at the end of this panel, and I keep talking about theologies of, I'm leaving here pondering a theology of experimentation over perfection. Because what that previous question brought for me was, I don't worship in UU congregations, but I am a seminarian. And some of the most powerful worships I had was when I was in seminary. It was not a Black seminary. The worships weren't specifically Black most of the time, but I remember really enjoying the worship and enjoying the experiences in worship. And what this conversation has brought me to is I think one of the things why those worships were so powerful were because in seminary, we engage in a theology of worship experimentation. We don't assume we know what it is and what a perfect worship is. And we have license and space to just try things and see what happens and explore. And I think often once we get into congregational life, we try to perfect our worship. right? What is the perfect worship? And I think we lose something in the striving for perfection in worship versus this sort of theology of experimentation. So I want to encourage, and I believe that's what makes Blue really powerful, is that there's so much experimentation, openness to trying. Let's see what happens when we do online worship. Let's see what happens when we have this revival. Let's see. And there's an excitement and a zeal, and there's a way in which spirit can move in a space of experimentation that spirit cannot in a space of where you demand perfection. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Donte. That's perfect and warm and wonderful. Ian, I'm coming to you. Closing thoughts. Tell us, oh brilliant seminarian, what are you thinking about for your closing remark, and who should we be reading or listening to or looking at?
I would say, well, thank you. That question was really, really beautiful. And I don't know the ethnicity of the person who wrote it. And the reason that I say that is because if they are Black or brown and they are Unitarian Universalists, I would say they should be reading themselves, like reading their own God talk, because that's all theology is. Like that to me is the beginning, the foundation of it. Beyond that, I would say then you could go into reading some of Donte's stuff that he done put it from his master thesis project, all the wonderful things that I want to say Professor Mitchum, but Stephanie Mitchum has out, all the things that everyone on this panel has written, and all the things that I will soon to be writing. I would say that those are things that can be read, but primarily I keep going back to mining our own sources. And if the person who asked that question does not happen to be a person of color and they are in a community with Unitarians that are people of color, I would say talk to them, because that's also a way of getting that kind of information. And really, I feel like that is my closing thought of really, really looking within to see our own histories, and really, really also appreciating my school for really, really empowering me to do that. Even in the UU history course that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, by the end of it, I was not writing about Emerson or Thoreau. I was writing about my own history, and I was really, really grateful that my professor really advocated for that, even when I thought perhaps it wasn't enough. So in my own learning, I encourage other people to realize that their own history is UU history if they are in this tradition.
Brilliant, as we knew it would be. Thank you so much, Ian. Reverend Hampton, coming to you, closing thought, and who should we read or listen to or look at?
So many closing thoughts, but that Unitarian Universalism is ours, and we don't have to apologize for that. Because there's nothing we can do to mess it up. If you can figure out, there's another part of that sentence I want to say, but I'm not going to say it. And as for who we should be reading, okay. I mean, Stephanie Mitchum's on the line. Am I not going to tell you to not read her new book? But I am mostly a historian by not full training, but by training and circumstance. And so I tell everybody, if you don't read Du Bois, you have missed everything there is to know. If you want to know why we are in the situation we're in any way, you must read Du Bois. Du Bois tells us, shows us, guides us on the way to knowing how we are in the situation that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Reverend Hampton. Jerome, my fave, holler at the people. Who should we be listening to, learning from, looking at? What you got for us?
I'm the last person to recommend anybody, a scholar or a non-scholar or a scholar for a day. I'm not the person to make that recommendation, but this is what I can tell you. Get yourself into some contemporary Black art spaces. See how the people are expressing life in those, and note I said contemporary. Stop listening to spirituals, stop listening to jazz. Go get yourself into some contemporary Black art spaces and see how people are expressing their lives from that point of view. Along those lines, for closing remarks, one of the failures of Unitarian Universalism is that our understanding of music is deeply rooted in slavery and the civil rights era. It's rooted in the sins of whiteness, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so my prayer is that we will find a way to worship in Unitarian Universalism, a way to sing Unitarian Universalism that comes from some more of those contemporary Black art spaces, that we can find music that is of today, that speaks to the way Blackness is represented today. We should be reading Langston Hughes and we should be reading Maya Angelou, but there are people who are preaching through poetry today, and we need to find those people. So that would be my closing remarks and my prayer, is that we start to see Blackness as a contemporary thing that we're all living in.
Mm-hmm. Can't wait for us to get together and build that Beyonce, Cardi B, Black UU worship, Dero. Can't wait.
Yes. I'm about it.
Professor Mitchum, Stephanie, what do you have for us? Closing remarks, and what should the people be paying attention to?
I understand that expansion as well of thinking about music. Before I get there, I also believe in poetry, not just spoken word. I think spoken word is really dependent on who's around and what you can get to. But Claudia Rankine wrote Citizen, and I always go back to Audre Lorde because she just knows how to put those words together. Kelly Brown Douglas wrote a book called Stand Your Ground that really settles down this connection between justice and theology, and thinking about where Black bodies are. And then I've been into Patrice Khan and Asha Banda's When They Call You a Terrorist. So just thinking about things that are out there now. But I also think that music that's coming out is amazing. So I love Childish Gambino, and This Is America, and I haven't figured out how to get it on my phone. So that's my... So it rings, that's my ringtone, and Janelle Monáe. So that's where I am.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. Thank you all very, very much. I would just say briefly before I turn it over to Reverend Mykal to close us out and give us some special announcements. Thank you, everyone, for your brilliance and your greatness and being with us. Thank you to those who are watching. We couldn't have done this without you. We feel your love. We feel your warmth. We feel your energy. We thank you for your questions. And I will just say for myself, I am excited about the possibilities for thinking about where we might be in this discussion a year from now. Right? What we might build, envision, and make together. One of the things that we amplify in Blue a lot when we think about Blue's principles is that experimentation and creativity have to be a part of the work. So that willingness to innovate and build and create something new has really been essential to the spirit of Blue since the very beginning. And I will just say, as someone on the organizing collective board, a lot of times what happens is we might be sitting around planning or working together and someone will say, it would be great if we could do X, Y, Z. And we go, yeah, it really would. And then somebody goes, well, why can't we? And then inevitably someone runs and goes and gets the markers and the big Post-its. And before we know it, we've built something or we're trying something. I want everybody to feel empowered in the tradition of our people, in the tradition of Black people, to make and envision from who you are and where you are. In terms of who you should be reading, watching, or listening to, there's a lot that I could say in that, but I want to encourage you to listen to young Black people, listen to the children, listen to the youth, and listen to our elders, listen to our old folks, listen to our folks who might be almost on their way out of here at that end of life, and allow their lived experience to teach you something about what liberation looks like. So those voices on both ends of the life experience that might be silenced or marginalized, listen to the children, listen to the old folks. Reverend Mykal, we're coming to you.
All right, y'all. My goodness, this has lifted my spirits in a way that I don't even have words for. I'm deeply grateful for everyone who is here. I would encourage everyone who's listening to pay attention to these people. Pay attention to every single person who is on this panel right now, and pay attention to every Black person who is writing, speaking, singing, drawing. Pay attention to Black voices. Be invested in Black voices, and we all get better, and we all get a little more free when we're invested in Black people. And so that's what I would say to folks, and certainly listening to all of the music. I listen to a lot of Kendrick Lamar. It is deeply spiritual music. It really is. But if you're not paying attention, you're gonna miss it, right? So please pay attention to all of the voices. And what I would also want to do is to just lift up for a moment our second principle, right? This is love. This is love and self-love in all of the elements of all that we are doing. And we are going to continue this conversation because this isn't an end, right? This is the beginning. Loving ourselves and engaging in self-love is an ongoing business. It's a spiritual practice. And so we're going to continue to do that. And so beginning in February, we're going to continue this conversation in some community conversations that will be Black Sacred Space. So we're going to let folks know both by email and in our closed Facebook group when we're going to be offering these opportunities. Are going to be the fourth Wednesday of just about every month. I believe in May, we're going to do it on the fifth Wednesday, and we'll be off in August. But we're going to host these community conversations for anybody who is Black, to come into these spaces, into a Zoom room just like the one that you're watching, and engage in some deep conversation about really building a Black UU theological framework with our 7 principles of Black lives as the undercurrent for these conversations. So next month in February, we're going to kick it off with our first principle, which is that all Black lives matter. Very excited about this. It's going to be February 27th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we are really blessed that Reverend Sophia Betancourt and Reverend Bill Sinkford will be our special guests for that first conversation. Cool. So we're going to continue to do that every month up until and through September. And all of this will be basically the road leading up to the Harper Jordan Memorial Symposium, which we'll be hosting in October in St. Paul. So there's a lot to be said about all of that, but please, our Black folks who are listening and watching, please join us for these conversations. If you thought this was rich, imagine what will happen when we are all in space together, continuing these conversations and growing together and building together. I'm very excited about that. Am I missing anything, Dr. Takiyah?
No, you did a wonderful, wonderful job. Again, we hope that you will join us in explicitly Black sacred space in our closed group for the kickoff of those community conversations in February. We also hope that you will join us October 30th to November 2nd in St. Paul, Minnesota for the Harper Jordan Memorial Symposium, where we will gather together for plenaries, worship, and as much joy-filled community building as you can handle. So mark your calendars now. Registration for that goes live next month on February 13th, Black Love Day. So look for that via email as well as in social media space. And again, thank you for joining us for Whose Faith Is It Anyway? We couldn't have done it without all of our wonderful panelists and folks who are watching. We couldn't have done this without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Unmute yourselves, everybody. Say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care.
Good night.
Benjamin Quarles, I believe it is in a 1935 text, says that the Negro is the conscience of America.
We are here because of the great cloud of witnesses. And so let us think of our ancestors, our personal ones, our religious ones, our ones in the struggle.
Struggle is one that is long and deep, and that it requires of us to understand that we are part of a tradition of people who have always struggled before us.
And tonight is about naming the ancestors, burying the things that have brought us pain, whatever we've brought into this space. And at the same time, we're going to talk about hope and the hope that the ancestors give to us.
Our people have been having power since we came into this world. We were born with power, raised with power, live in power, birthed by power, stand in power. And we know that Frederick Douglass says this power concedes nothing without a demand. And so we know that there was a system that was created, an institution that was created to come and combat and dethrone and devalue the power of black people.
That New Orleans was a perfect space. The spirit, the ambiance, the aesthetics of it, just in the history and the rich culture that's here really, I think, gave people the permission to be black in this space and to try on what that looks like, even though it has this a spectrum or an array of how it shows up. But I think it was a space that created this kind of narrative where it could center around just who we were as black people in the Unitarian Universalist Association.
Visibilizing the structures of oppression that live within us and having a community of folks to work through that with, who will hold you and support you in moving through that, is part of the central thing that I think is coming out of this community.
So the most powerful moments in this conference have been the worships for me. Hearing from Black sources and Black love in worship doesn't happen where I'm from, and all white congregations. I love it, I need it. As someone who's going into ministry, it's nice to see their sources and know that there's people out there doing the same work that still thrive on Black love.
We call into the presence of all of those who came before us, knowing that we are the dreams of our ancestors.
We are grieved. We are sad. We may even be angry. But we also feel a glimmer of hope that we can overcome the burdens and obstacles that life places before us. We can find the strength and courage to go on.
I'm free, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free. Hallelujah.